unlocking your world of creativity with best-selling author and brand innovator, Mark Stinson. This episode is brought to you by White Cloud Coffee Roasters, where every bean tells a story of adventure. Visit whitecloudcoffee.com and use the code CREATIVITY.
Welcome back, friends, to our podcast, Your World of Creativity. I'm Mark Stinson, and we're talking with creative professionals around the globe about how we get inspired, how we organize ideas, and most of all, how we gain the confidence and the connections to launch our work out into the world. And my guest today is an award-winning producer, director, screenwriter, Jordan Morris. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
And we're stamping our creative passport in London, Ontario, Canada today. Jordan is a screenwriter known for his work Nintendo Quest, also a documentary, Mr. Dressup, The Magic of Make-Believe, which won a People's Choice Award for Best Documentary. And now he's the creator of some great tools and models to help other writers tell our stories better. And Jordan, I guess that's a great place to start. I love your handle, The Writer Igniter. We all seem to have a story inside of us, but that ignite idea, we need to get it out, don't we?
Yeah. And most people who start the process don't have the kind of training that they really require. So I don't want to talk down to anybody. That's not the point at all. But most aren't even aware of all the tools they have to work with. So I like to compare it to the difference between a 6 crayon box and one of those big 64 crayon boxes.
Right.
So I believe that I provide them with that 64 crayon box.
Fantastic. I love the title of one of these tools, the Life and Death Story Model. What a great framework. What really inspired you to rethink the traditional narrative structure? People think a story has to go like this, and you really helped to shift that thinking a little bit.
It still references all of the classic story shapes and models, all the patterns that people demand and expect out of stories, but it divides it into kind of 2 parallel stories in a way that makes it a little easier for people to understand what all the components within a story need to do. So all the terminology that I use tends to explain itself. And by dividing it into those 2 basic halves, those 2 containers, the life story being the internal conflict that a character is dealing with, and the death story being the external and more immediately threatening, it allows them to see what they need out of each side of it. And as they go through plotting their stories, we ask them to make sure that everything is in balance. So it's not like you switch back and forth between the 2. It's not like one is the A story and one is the B story, which is terminology we hear a lot of the time. They're of equal import and both have an important job to do in forcing the transformation of your central character. So just laying it out in a new way that kind of explains itself like that tends to help people pick it up a lot more quickly, and they can write more effectively, more quickly as well.
Mm-hmm. Can you share an example, just a quick highlight of this model in action, maybe something from your work?
Yeah. Let's see, like to a classic story would be, let's just go with one of the best of its kind, the Die Hard model. The life story is John McClane's relationship with his wife, his separated wife. And the death story is the immediate problem he has to deal with in the form of the bad guys and Hans Gruber. So that's if we just break the story in half. And although the life story part of it doesn't get as much screen time as the death story because of the genre that thing's in, it's an action movie. So that's what people go to the action movies to see. It's an important part of his motivation. So he would not have done what he did throughout that movie had she not have been a part of it, which I find really interesting. Like, he's not actually trying to be a hero at the beginning of the story. He's just trying to get the attention of the police so that they can solve the problem. And it's not until she becomes directly threatened by the bad guys that he moves into hero mode towards the second half of the movie and wants to protect her. And in theory, although again, we only get a glimpse of it right at the end when they walk out of the building kind of arm in arm, he's reconciled his relationship with her and he understands how important she is in his life and he doesn't want to live without her. And that was the motivation basically through the whole thing, or what he had to discover and confirm for himself before the story ended.
Yes.
Again, it's an action movie. That's not what the crowds went to see. But without that, whole story would have felt a lot more hollow and more like just a simple series of events. But
Yes.
there's a nice transformation baked into that.
Continuing that thought that you're mentioning, sort of the emotion or the relationships, you have written that plot grabs attention, but emotion keeps it. You've got an emotion arc that you work with writers on. A lot of scripts fall flat in this area, you say. Why do we writers need to dig a little deeper emotionally? Without losing the structure, of course, but we've got to put more feeling into the script.
Yeah. If you want to, well, one of your, I guess the number one job of a writer is to elicit an emotional response from their audience. And I like to go a little further and say elicit the intended emotional response. Because if I write a horror movie and people laugh at it, I wouldn't call that a
That's an
success.
emotion.
Yeah, but not necessarily a win. So we need to be able to concentrate on what's going on inside the character. Right? Most people are focused on the plot, like the external events of the story. And typically that'll result in an experience for the audience that's just what they call in the industry critically a series of events, but not a story. They'll say, this is a series of events, but this doesn't feel like a story. It's because it's not emotionally resonant. So I've created kind of a reference tool called the emotional arc that works with real life psychology about what we go through to get into and out of traumatic experiences. And so it's based on real clinical work and exactly how people respond to pressures and that type of thing. And if you can't make your audience feel something intended throughout your story, they typically won't even bother finishing the story, let alone be moved by it. So that's a big part of what I do early on in the process is what do we want our audience to feel and how are we going to get them there? And then we can focus on the protagonist and what they're feeling in the moment and what they would need to go through to actually be forced into the change that's required to make them into the hero that the story needs. And if you can focus in on that, then it's a matter of transferring that kind of emotional resonance to your audience, which has got part of it is storycraft, your ability to tell a good story. Part of it is page craft. In screenwriting in particular, how you present your work on the page is either going to help you achieve that or it's going to hurt you. It's never just a neutral. So you've got to develop two kind of skill sets in equal part, storycraft and pagecraft, which is far more than just formatting. It's got a lot to do with how, again, you present your work on the page and the word choice that you use. And then, of course, as screenwriters, we've got to do it in the most concise way possible. So we sometimes have to literally tell stories with the fewest words possible, which means right down to every single word choice is going to be important. Like the verbs that you use are so critical to making the story kind of land more resonantly. Yeah. So it's a very complex kind of puzzle to put together a screenplay, but it's super fun to play with all the tools once you've been introduced to them and have a chance to see how they work and why they work.
Yes.
That's where I come in.
So interesting how you talk about how we present the work or how it lands on the page. It's like they just didn't get my idea, as if it's the reader or the receivers. But you've coined the term undercooked. That these ideas they're just not fully baked.
That's
And
right.
you've got a process for that called story forging, which I love the kind of cooking and pressure proofing connotation of that. Maybe you could tell us more about that.
Yeah, the Story Forge was born out of my own frustration with my own work earlier on in my career. I was saying before we started, I read all the books. I've just got a massive collection of all the screenwriting books, and I've been on every website and watched all the videos. And I would follow every step along the way. And I would be frustrated because at the end of it, I'd have 100 pages that didn't quite work, even though I thought that I was following the rules specifically exactly as they were presented. So that frustration just led me to search out better processes, better ways to get it done. So the Story Forge is a 1-month process that I put new and emerging writers through. We get together 4 times over the course of a month for a couple of hours at least. And then I write them homework specifically tailored to where they're at in their story and in their own development. So it's all about asking just hundreds and hundreds of questions. I believe very fully that all writers have the answers, but a lot of them don't have the questions, and that's where I come in. So it's just this protracted kind of conversational interview process where I ask them what their intentions are. Why did you choose that? And why do you want that to happen? And if they can't answer that really confidently, then it's probably worth looking at. Or if their answers contradict one another, which happens often as well, then we can zero in on that and say, you said this here, but then you said this down here, and they don't play nice together. So what is it exactly that you're going after in that respect? And it really takes quite a bit of time to distill down people's thoughts on what the central themes are of their story. And theme's a whole nother ball of wax that people get really frustrated with because that's a slippery concept, a nebulous concept. So I've got some very practical tools so that we can make it more actionable instead of just like conversations about theory. we can talk about exactly what their intentions are and then how to get it on the page.
So good that we get this kind of help with our craft. And if we do break it down into a craft, it's not just creativity for creativity's sake, that we're actually trying to produce the work.
Yeah. You have
Jordan,
to
maybe this
remember,
is a good time to let people know where to find you, where to learn more about these tools and the courses that you provide.
yeah, sure. My website is Jordan Morris, Writer Igniter, all one word, .com. And if you do any kind of search for that, my name and Writer Igniter, you'll probably get a hit. On there, there's a contact page where you can just reach out to me and ask questions. I always block out time every single week to make time for people to just reach out and talk to me. I'm infamous for not selling or pressuring, so I'm not going to try to land you on something. If we only talk together the one time, I'll just do my best to be as useful to you as I possibly can in that time. But if you're curious about what it's like to work with me, then I'd love to set up a time and talk about it. My attitude is that if you invest in me, the least I can do is the reverse and invest in you a little bit. Let us get to know each other a little bit. Because if we don't communicate successfully, then I don't like our chances of getting somewhere really valuable. But if we get on really well and you like the sound of what I might be able to offer to you, then I can guarantee we'll have a good time. And I think you'll discover some things about yourself as a writer that you may not have otherwise been aware of.
Sounds great. I'm talking with Jordan Morris, the writer igniter. I love that term. Continuing this thought, Jordan, that on originality, on ideas, it's one thing to have the idea, but how you communicate it, how you write it, how you get it on the page. You've often said, hey, it's about voice. How do you coach writers to really uncover, well, could it be their voice or is it a voice, the right voice for the story?
Yeah, that's true. Because for example, if you're working in a writer's room, if you have to get lucky enough to work on a show that already exists, then it's not about your own personal voice in that case. You're trying to find the voice of the show. So in some cases, that's important to know how to tune into that and adopt that for yourself. But when I'm working with new and emerging writers, typically it's about establishing what their voice is. Like, what are you going to be about as a writer? What specialty are you going to be a part of? You can't go into this industry and tell everybody that you can write anything. Nobody will believe you. So it's really good for your career if you come in as a specialist in something. And I like to say that in this industry, especially, if you can be replaced, you will be replaced.
Ouch.
So your best defense is a good offense in that you're creating things that are really special and that literally no one else can write. So that when they do start to work, if somebody enjoys it, the only way they can get their next fix is to come back to you. So it's really a conversation about what's important to you? Like, what gets under your skin? What do you want to talk about? The three questions, I can't remember who introduced me to these, but it's if you're talking about a story, what's it about? What's it really about? And what are you trying to say? And typically a conversation around that will be really productive and we'll land on something that they're really passionate about. And then we can try to weave that into and use that to inform what genre they might really be an expert in eventually, like where they might land in that respect, tonal issues. What's your specialty there, the comedic or dark or whatever it is, and just really try to figure out what makes you special and unique. And that creates a little bit of a need for some introspection and to get really familiar with yourself. And sometimes it's about exercising your own kind of past traumas and that type of thing without getting into some kind of a session like a psychologist session or something like that. There is a little bit of self-exploration that's required to be a really effective writer. You might be able to have a career just writing surface level stuff or really, really shallow work. And certainly it's out there. But again, if you want to go the distance and you really want to be known, you want to put your fingerprint on the work that you do produce and become famous for something in particular, then it really has a lot to do with you becoming fully aware of who you are as an artist and how best to express yourself and the kind of subject matter and themes and that type of thing that you could feel at home with for years and years. And those are typically the writers that do really well.
Yes. This really hits home, I think, to writers, well, or any artists who want to move from aspiring to a career, to producing the work.
Yeah.
I've been in many creative groups where I've got lots of drafts on file. I'm working on 7 other stories. I've got some leads, whatever. How do we finally gain, I often call it the confidence, but there must be this trigger moment where you say, this work is ready to hit the send button.
Yeah.
It's got to be submitted if I'm ever going to get it off the file and onto the film. Where do you find that point?
Yeah, the two things come to mind immediately. The first is that, especially in this industry that I'm mostly a part of, which is television and film production, it's never really finished. You just have to decide when you're finished with it because it'll move on to the next set of hands, right? If you're writing novels, then you're going directly to your audience. But in this industry, we don't ever communicate directly with the audience. We communicate with the filmmaker. Sometimes that's us if we're an indie filmmaker. Sometimes that's a producer or executive or whatever. But it goes on and gets reinterpreted. So it never ends with us. And it can get really frustrating for some writers to know that it goes on and becomes something maybe other than what they intended. Sometimes it gets better. Sometimes it gets worse from what they had hoped it would be. But if you get paid for your work, I like to say you won. So turn around and enjoy the win and don't look back because it's no longer your concern. But the other is just that, yeah, how do you get the confidence to know when to hit send or when to have it move on? The thing that really transformed me more than anything else was just being introduced to the idea of process, of having a dependable, repeatable process that you can count on to produce your best work. So part of that is what I'm doing with the Story Forge and some other processes, just asking tons of questions. But the other thing that I think is really critical is that you share your work with other people at every stage along the way. So I've got a particular process that I teach people that starts with a single sentence kind of summary of what you're trying to do, which in our business we call the log line. And there's different iterations of that in every kind of space for creative writing. So can you capture somebody's attention and curiosity and entertain them in one sentence? And if you can't do that, then you probably need to work away at the concept a little more before you can hook them and pull them in and have them ask, I want to know more. And then we expand it out at regular intervals into 4 sentences and then 12 and then 36 and just start to experiment with the structure of it. And in some cases, people push back and feel that's really dry because they want to get to the fun part, which is just writing by the seat of their pants. But in this industry, again, in particular, you can't do that. You're probably not going to find success doing that. None of the working screenwriters out there kind of write in the dark and write trying to find the story as they write. As they say, you can't build the boat and sail the boat at the same time. So development is a really important part of story building in my industry. And I think it's of value to everybody doing every kind of narrative storytelling, like creative storytelling. Sharing your work regularly and testing it so that you can get proof that it's working is critical. And if you've done that through every step along the way, all these multiple stages that I tend to use, that by the time you're into like the polishing passes of your screenplay or whatever it is, your novel, then you're confident. You know that it works because you've already gotten dozens and dozens of bits and pieces of feedback from people that give valuable feedback, not your friends and family. They don't count.
Yes.
It has to be allies, maybe other writers, maybe complete strangers that you can test it on. That's really important. And I think too many people enter this space with these romantic ideas of what being a writer is. Like you're going to go into a cabin in the woods and come out with your manuscript a few days later, or you're going to sit in the corner of a romantic Parisian kind of cafe and type away your novel, whatever it is.
Yes.
It really doesn't work that way. You shouldn't try to work in a silo like that. You need to let your work breathe and you need to test it on real people, not just yourself, because you really don't count. Obviously, you need to be happy with the process and you have to satisfy yourself during, but the idea is that you satisfy other people with the work when you've got it finished. So you can't lose track of your audience and you have to make sure that you're keeping them happy as well, all the way through the entire process.
Yes. But Jordan, you're also mentioning navigating the work through the natural market forces, the market, all the buyers, all the
Yeah.
audiences. And I think about previous guests and people in our audience who've commented on this, maintaining this healthy creative ego. That's fine to keep the voice of the work and that sort of thing.
Right.
But there will be an editor, there will be a producer, there's a record executive, there's zoning and regulatory bodies that'll approve your architecture work, whatever creative art we're in. How do we balance that? My advertising, I think about, oh, market research killed my great idea, or the client watered it down, or whatever the case is. But there is that market reality of getting the work out. How do you find that balance? And how do you personally coach us to maintain our voice while getting the work out?
Yeah, it can be sobering to just really look at your work and to know whether or not you've got something that's commercially viable. We are constantly reminded because our industry is called show business. So the show part of it's only half of the equation. It still has to do business, or there's really no point in doing it. Because again, we're not going directly to the audience. Nobody buys and reads screenplays for pleasure. Like that's just not a thing. We've got to make sure that it's got an audience at the far end of all the effort that we put into it. And it doesn't matter what you're doing, like you say, whether you're a visual artist or a musician or what have you. There has to be an ability. I guess the big question is, do you want to get paid for your work? If you don't want to get paid for your work and it's just a hobby, then all bets are off. You can do whatever you like and there's no expectation of any kind of return on it. But if you want to get paid for your work as an artist, then you have to pay attention to the business side of it. When I'm working with new screenwriters, I tell them, like, if you want to be a screenwriter, you're committing to being an expert in genre. That's one of the things, one of the many things that you have to become an expert in is the genre. And then there's this thing known as packaging, like how you put together a potential movie project. How do you package it? Like, where is it going to be set in the marketplace? And the log line can help us. That's a litmus test as well. A lot of writers, especially the artiste types, hate log lines. Like, how dare you expect me to condense my 100 pages down to one sentence? It's outrageous. I can't do it. What they don't realize is that if they can't do that, it's suggested that their story idea, doesn't necessarily have a place in the market. Because if you can't actually create a single sentence kind of capture of the essence of what you're trying to do, then how on earth is the industry going to market it? They're going to think ahead to, what does this look like as a poster? What does this look like as a trailer? And if it's too complex, convoluted, or nuanced, and the audience doesn't get it, it's not going to sell. We see that regularly. So it's not about dumbing it down. It's about distilling your ideas into the most precise, easily digestible, and easily understood. And that can be difficult for people to get their heads around. Again, it's not about shooting for the dirt. It's just speaking as clearly as possible in as concisely a manner as possible. Because if you can't do that with your work, there's so many options for people. They're just going to move on to the next one and try that on instead.
And it's so interesting. We use these industry terms like logline, but there's a very practical application, right? What is that one sentence in the back of the airline magazine that says what this movie is about? What does the streaming tagline say? Because you got that 8 seconds and then I'm moving on to some other show or some other platform.
That's right.
So very practical.
You've got to be able to draw that curiosity blood of your audience instantly. If you can't do that, then your concept probably needs more work, more distillation, and more kind of development, as I say.
Yes. I'd like to broaden out to 50,000 foot a little bit
Sure.
and think about the creativity in this changing landscape of media options and everything else in a couple of different veins. The first is community building. You mentioned writer groups and peer, but you've worked across a lot of theater and film. And I was reading about a community building program called Storytown, where the creative process is really a community. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I've created this online. It operates basically as a speakeasy for screenwriters. So I've built it.
You have to know the secret knock or something to get in?
Yeah. At this point, you can't get into it unless I invite you into it. So everybody that I work with in any capacity gets an invitation into the Storytown space. And in there, I've got a massive library of produced screenplays and show Bibles and all kinds of ebooks, like reference materials in there. So there's a big library. There's areas for exchanging ideas and getting feedback from the other members in Storytown. There's places where we kind of share videos, clips from movies or interviews with writers, whatever is pertinent. And it's just a very kind of calm, relaxed place where writers can sit in there and get inspiration. And we meet every couple of weeks online as well, just to share ideas or spotlight one of our writers if they're having an interesting project or they've found success and they want to tell us about what happened. Because everybody wants to know how you get there. How did you find success? What did you do? Why did that project work for you? Who do you know? All these kinds of things. Allowing our little community to cross-pollinate and learn and gain wisdom from each other is really helpful. So I really enjoy it. And at some point in the future, maybe it'll get big enough. I'm in the process right now of actually converting everything that I do into a do-it-yourself, self-taught course. And once that's built, then maybe we'll start selling kind of subscriptions to that space. But at the moment, it's just for the people that have worked directly with me. And I love watching them continue to grow and go on to do things and find success in their corners of the world as well. So it's a little labor of love for me right now.
Yes. And we creatives need that kind of support, but also collaboration, don't we? to see
100%.
others being successful.
Yeah.
The other topic about the changing landscape, I would be remiss without asking you about AI.
Mm.
Every conversation about writing and creativity somehow comes around to this topic and how we're either witnessing the revolution or the ruin of great storytelling. Where are you at,
Yeah.
and how is it all fitting together?
I think we're going to see a healthy dose of both. If you look at what it's doing to Hollywood proper right now, and the way that they're applying it from top down, so the executives and the accountants looking for more profits are just laying off as many people as they can from the. But if you look at it as a really powerful tool that independence might be able to wield, like we're not that far away from somebody actually, a single person being able to create a TV show or a feature film, which is mind boggling. So those kind of creatives are going to be able to have an opportunity that they otherwise probably wouldn't have got. So I feel for everybody that's involved in the industry right now because it is crumbling and eating itself at the moment while they try to figure out how to make it work. But I'm also excited about what it can do for individuals. I still think very strongly that if you don't have the fundamentals of storytelling down and all the stuff that we've been talking about in this conversation, then it's going to produce really derivative, trashy work. Like it's going to be really thin. And some people are just very excited and even satisfied by hitting a button and having it spit out a story. I made that. Is yay, it exists. It didn't before, now it does. So I've been warning everybody and telling them that my prediction is in the next couple of years, we're going to have a deluge of mediocre, if not really garbage like efforts, because it's now so accessible to anybody. Anybody can now call themselves a writer just by prompting AI, but it's not good. Truly speaking, it's not good. It's not emotionally resonant because it doesn't have a soul and it's referencing things that already exist. So it's not a great vehicle for you to express your point of view, your unique narrative voice. It's a great tool for editing. It's a great tool for kind of compressing and speeding up the process. But if you're just trying to skip to the satisfaction of having something that didn't exist before just appear out of thin air, I don't like your chances of finding great success that way. I think at best it's an assistant. A lot of people have used it. I've used it to try it with editing, but for instance, whenever I ask it to write dialogue, it's absolute trash. It's just the worst. So it still comes down to the writer. I still encourage people to learn all of these skills and all of these concepts at the deepest possible level so that you can be fluent in it. And then if you choose to use AI or some other kind of assistant, then it's not going to dilute you. It's still going to represent your voice. And we're going to get the authentic kind of stories that move us that we really need right now. But be prepared because there's going to be a lot of crap coming up in the next little while.
Yes. Let's circle back then to story forging and this idea of pressure testing. And could this play a role in we creatives future proofing, I'll say, the storytelling process? It's okay, no matter where this originated or what button you push to create something, you still have to forge it.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe it'll be possible for AI to do that at some point in the future. Who knows where the heck it's going to go? It's moving so quickly right now. But I do think that it's a valuable part of the process. Like, I really love working with the writers that I work with because we get to know each other on a really deep level. My job, in my opinion, is not to insert my own sensibilities into the work. That's a really important thing to me. It's my job is to help bring all of these things out of the writer themselves. And again, to help them create really unique work that's theirs, that reflects their experience in life, their point of view, their past pains and traumas, that type of thing. So I think that it's a deeply human thing to express ourselves through art. And the machine can't do that, at least not yet. And whenever it tries to copy what we do, it comes out really pale and shallow and really unsatisfying as far as the read goes. So it's worth the time and effort. And there may be some shortcuts, but it just takes time to develop these kinds of instincts of your own and skills. That gets into the kind of skill versus talent argument. Some people think they're really talented, but nobody in my industry cares if you're talented. They care if you've got the applicable skills. So you might not be the most talented person in the room, but you can learn the skills to be the most effective writer in the room. So never let that kind of freak you out either. But it just takes time to learn. And it's tough because you're taking on something like pagecraft alone in screenwriting is like learning Mandarin Chinese. Like it's a very different language to learn. Like it doesn't make any sense. It's counterintuitive. I refer to it as the platypus of creative writing because it's really weird. And that's why nobody reads it for entertainment's sake alone. Right? They go to see the movie, but they don't want to read the screenplay because they don't understand why it's presented that way. So be patient with yourself and really think about what it is that you're bringing to this space and what it is that you could talk about literally for the rest of your life. Like the themes and the subject matter and that kind of thing, that again could be your specialty and that you will get never tired of exploring. Not to say that you can't go on and explore different things and move into different genres later, but when you're starting out, it's really important to find out who you are so that you can express that voice most clearly. And that takes some time, that takes some conversation, and that takes, in my case anyway, it takes hundreds of questions. Why? Why do you want to do this? Why that? Why here? All these things. And in the end, because we beat it up and looked at it from 100 different angles, the product, the end result is typically much more successful. And my favorite feedback from the clients that I get is, wow, this is a lot different than I thought it was going to be when we started out. But at the same time, it feels a lot more like the story I wanted to tell. And when I get any form of that back from them, then I know I've done a good job.
That's a good day. So good. My guest has been Jordan Morris. Jordan, I can't thank you enough for the great conversation, your process, but also your experience and your insights. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It was really a treat to be here with you. So
And
thank you
so
again.
practical. I love talking about the theories of creativity and the principles and all that, but getting down to how you get your story on the page. This is how we get our work into the world. And I always love talking about that.
Yeah, that was the inspiration for me, is we have to keep it practical. So I provide people with tools so they can actually complete these projects and exercise the demon they're dragging around. So yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
It's all good stuff. And listeners, I will put Jordan's links in the show notes, but as he said, when you Google Jordan Morris and you say writer igniter, you're going to find him today because we're going to ignite a lot of writing after this
Sounds
show.
great.
I'm sure we are. I want to also thank our sponsor, White Cloud Coffee Roasters. Use the code CREATIVITY at checkout. Get 10% off your first order. That'll really inspire some writing and keep you up while you're trying to get your story on the page. So visit whitecloudcoffee.com for all their blends and all their selections. And if you like today's episode, be sure to subscribe to Your World of Creativity, rate us, leave us a review on your favorite podcast app, and then join us again next time. We're going to continue these around the world journeys. As I said, we stamped our passport in London, Ontario, Canada today, but we'll continue our travels talking to creative professionals around the world to find out how they get inspired, how they organize their ideas, and most of all, how they bring their ideas to life through their collaborations and connections. So I'm Mark Stinson. Keep unlocking your world of creativity. We'll see you next time.